Lithuanian anti-Semitism in the late 19th, early 20th century has already drawn the attention of many historians, not only in Lithuania. There are some books, articles, but also in Germany, for example. Klaus Richter, who was talking yesterday, wrote a PhD recently, and as far as I know, his book will be published next year. In this paper, I'm going to present a kind of ideological structure of Lithuanian anti-Semitism, and also I will try to show how its impact changed in late imperial period, which means till First World War started. According to my understanding, in Lithuanian anti-Semitic narrative, there are several dominant segments or topics. First of all, religious, then economic, cultural, and political. And now I'm going to examine all these four segments, show their role and how this role changed during the period and the discussion. So, as mentioned before, I'll start with anti-Judaism. Of all the aforementioned topics or themes, religious Judophobia is, of course, the oldest in Lithuanian discourse. Jews have been persecuted in line with medieval Christian traditions in Lithuania for having renounced the true faith, and were collectively to blame for the murder of Christ. But the most dangerous for Jews were the blood libel accusations, at least when we speak about 19th century history. These convictions were rather popular among the masses and even among the more educated society, and sometimes provoked pogroms. And as Francois mentioned yesterday, the majority of pogroms which took place in Lithuania, there were about 10 of them, depending on definition. The majority of them happened after the blood libel accusation was formulated, and Jews were accused of using Christian blood for their religious purposes. Probably the most radical and undoubtedly the most known example of Lithuanian religious Judophobia is infamous priest Pranaitis and his book, The Talmud and Mass. Pranaitis explained all the wrongdoings of Jews, primarily their contempt for Christianity, as having arisen from the Talmud, which was said to allow Jews to kill Christians. One particular situation in late imperial period highlighting the different attitudes of the Lithuanian periodical press and also political trends within the Lithuanian national movement concerning this religious element. It happened during infamous Bailey's case in Ukraine. You know that there was a blood libel accusation in Ukraine just before First World War, and it was widely discussed in all newspapers through the Russian Empire, so including Lithuanian press. If the liberal Lithuanian press condemned the trial process and Pranaitis, who was actually defending that accusation against Jews, so if the liberal press condemned them for spreading such medieval prejudices, and the nationalist newspaper, with this hope, attempted not to disclose its position, they are quite clever, then the clerical press stood up to defend already mentioned priest Pranaitis, and even though indirectly welcomed the mentioned accusation and used the protest itself to strengthen the claim that the Jews already controlled all the press publications in the world. Now to the second topic, to the economic competition. It's precisely economic arguments that are most often mentioned in anti-Semitic texts. The clerical reproaches toward Jews were summarized by the priest Antanas Maliauskas. In his opinion, Jews were by nature inclined to cheat, and their most important goal was to profit at any cost. They were a parasitic element of society, as they chose only the easiest jobs, exploited others, and if that were not enough, they demoralized the society in which they lived. Such texts usually occurred only in published small books, but not in the press. And I don't have any clear explanation why they were so blunted in books and more mild accusations in the press. In the liberal stream, certain changes are visible. Anti-Semitic texts disappeared in the liberal press in the last years of the 19th century. It was quite strong in 1880s and early 90s, but then everything of that kind disappeared from liberal press. The change was most likely related to changes in the leadership of this political group. In mid-1890s, left-wing activists came into power in this organization of that liberal part of the Lithuanian national movement. And this group was in a very close cooperation with the activists of the Social Democratic Party. And so it diminished to some extent their animosity towards Jews. Later texts that could be described as anti-Semitic or close to anti-Semitic would rarely appear in the pages of Lithuanian liberal press, especially after 1905 revolution. The social democratic press, which followed not so much national as class ideology, and here I speak about Lithuanian social democrats, if it featured article on this topic at all, highlighted that the exploiters were not all Jews, but only the Jewish bourgeoisie. Now to the third topic, cultural threat. Back in 1908, Mykolas Riomeris, or in Polish Michał Riomer, in his famous study about Lithuanian national movement, noticed that, I quote, Jews themselves do not pose a threat to Lithuanian national culture. In the sphere of national culture, the question of Lithuanian-Russian and Lithuanian-Polish relations was 100 times more acute than that being Lithuanian and Jews, the end of quotation. In truth, the leaders of Lithuanian nationalism saw a greater cultural threat, firstly from Poles, Russians, and partly also from Germans, especially in the Lithuania Minor, or Prussian Lithuania. The historically determined Polish-speaking cultural domination in Lithuania was understood by some leaders of the Lithuanian national movement, primarily from the right wing, as the greatest cultural threat to Lithuanian ethnic culture. The so-called Russification policies were also real threats to the unhindered spread of Lithuanian ethnic culture. Meanwhile, in the German Empire, there was a rather rapid Lithuanian acculturation and assimilation into the dominant German culture. In this context, Jewish culture, which neither the imperial government nor the country's social elite considered worthy of respect, could in no way pose any threat to Lithuanians. Indeed, sometimes Jews happen to spread, so in the eyes of Lithuanians, a foreign culture, a foreign language. But of course, in that case, not Lithuanian, but in the period we are talking now, they had in mind Russian language, and for which they were condemned in the pages of Lithuanian press. And the same might be found also in the Polish press of that time. The last theme were the Jews political enemies of Lithuanians in the eyes of the leaders of that national movement. Publications of a Catholic orientation featured another claim that was typical of the anti-Semitic discourse that was popular at that time in Europe. The Jews aimed or practically already controlled the world. The clerical periodicals had no doubt that Jews controlled the world via the banks, other financial institutions, trade, and periodical publications. Another pretension against Jews was that they did not support the Lithuanian national movement, and, I quote, showed no concern for national issues, end of quotation, having in mind Lithuanian national issues. From the perspective of Lithuanian nationalism, the dominant political aims on Jewish street were in fact in opposition to the Lithuanian political program. And now I will skip that part since I was talking about this topic yesterday. But to summarize it, there was a confrontation between two concepts of national autonomy. Lithuanians, like the majority of other non-dominant ethnic groups, were trying to get territorial autonomy and to be a dominant group or dominant nation in that territory. So Lithuanians wanted a national autonomy in so-called ethnographic Lithuania, so that they would dominate in that territory, having also the majority, because they understood clearly that if they would be the minority or just one of many national groups, they will suffer because they are just a peasant nation and cannot compete with higher culture nations like Poles, Russians, etc. And of course for Jews there was no need, no sense to support this claim for territorial autonomy or nation state, and their interest was to gain personal autonomy within the Russian Empire. However, as in many other European countries, the most common political pretension against Jews would be heard from the right wing of the Lithuanian national movement, and was related to the active participation of Jews in leftist parties and movements. This topic became especially heated during the elections to the 4th Russian Duma, quasi-parliament, in one of the Lithuanian provinces, specifically in Suwalki province, which was part of the Kingdom of Poland, but ethnically dominated by Lithuanians. When in one bloc, the representatives of the Lithuanian left and under Andrius Bulota united with the Jews and faced off against the Lithuanian clericals. So in that situation, the Lithuanian clerical press accused the Jews of seeking to spread progressive, that means leftist ideas, which was of course wrong, according to their understanding, whereas Bulota's greatest sin was his collaboration with Jews. And now, instead of conclusions, I will present some remarks with regard to the political elites and grassroots. What was communication and perception in these two groups? There was no shortage of anti-Semitic articles in the Lithuanian press and the liberal press of the late 19th century, as well as clerical press for the whole period under discussion, can be classified as anti-Semitic, at least to some extent. Nevertheless, anti-Semitism didn't develop into an organized political movement in Lithuania, and anti-Semitic ideology did not constitute an important part of Lithuanian nationalism. Nationalism means nothing wrong in this case. Racial ideas also did not catch on, and there were only a few notions about the irredeemable nature of the Jews. One of the most important reasons for the relatively narrow scale of Lithuanian anti-Semitism, as was already noted in historiography, was tied to the slow pace of social economic modernization in Lithuania, as was mentioned already yesterday. Regardless of certain economic and social changes, Lithuania continued to be an agrarian country, and the ethnic division of labor that had been formed long ago, where Lithuanians farmed the land and Jews carried out various intermediary functions, remained essentially the same. And although Lithuanians did aim to establish themselves in trade or other businesses, they didn't reach a stage that generated harsh conflicts. As is known, in Lithuania, compared with its neighboring countries, where there were large Jewish communities, there were relatively, as I already mentioned, few pogroms, and the damage done was marginal. Even though this socio-economic interpretation is important, it cannot suffice if only because it doesn't explain why, in late 19th century, anti-Semitism was strong in both the clerical and liberal press, and later weakened. The relatively weak expression of anti-Semitism in Lithuanian press in the early 20th century should be linked to political conjuncture. Lithuanian nationalism had a clear anti-imperial character, and Jews, who among the political active section of society were mostly activists of leftist or liberal persuasion, were suitable allies in the struggle. Thus, the Lithuanian leftist parties had the greatest influence among Lithuanian voters during elections to State Duma. They would easily form voting blocs with Jews. There are also the Poles, who were important opponents to both Lithuanian Social Democrats and nationalists, but there was already talk about it yesterday, and very shortly, Jews were needed as allies against the enemy of Lithuanians, the Poles. This need for a political alliance with Jews minimized anti-Semitism in Lithuanian press. However, it can be assumed that the genuine or circumstantial benevolence of some Lithuanian nationalist leaders toward Jews was not transmitted to the masses. One could find many situations which could prove this claim. I will present just one telling story related to the aforementioned Bailey's case. The critical articles by Darius Staliūnas, one of the liberal-minded Lithuanian politicians, in one of the newspapers in Lietuvos Ūkininkas, about the supposed Jewish use of Christian blood for their religious rituals and Pranaitis critique, provoked great dissatisfaction among some readers. The editorial board rushed to convince its readers that it was the superstition itself that deserved criticism, but that it by no means defended those Jews who, I quote, harmed and exploited Lithuanians. Though it's probably the case that this defense from the editorial board was ineffective, as the following year the number of subscriptions to this newspaper fell precisely because of the text by Staliūnas.